Have you ever noticed yourself doing things that feel completely normal? Apologizing even when you did nothing wrong. Checking people's mood before you speak. Feeling guilty the moment you finally sit down to relax. Most people never question these habits. They simply assume, that's just who I am. But psychology suggests something surprising. Sometimes what we call personality may actually be signs of childhood emotional neglect. Quiet survival patterns the nervous system learned years ago, inside an environment where emotional needs were ignored. And the strangest part is, many people carry these patterns into adulthood without ever realizing where they came from. In this video, you'll discover some of the most common everyday habits that may reveal signs of childhood emotional neglect. And the more of these habits you recognize, the greater the chance that what you've always called your personality was actually a way your nervous system learned to survive. Watch until the end, because the last few signs are often the ones people never expect. 1. You learn to take up less space. Have you ever caught yourself trying not to make noise, even inside your own home? You close doors gently. Walk a little more quietly than everyone else. Lower the volume of your footsteps, even when nobody is sleeping, and nobody has ever asked you to. If someone suddenly enters the room, you instinctively become quieter, almost smaller. Most people never question this. They simply think, I've always been like this. But psychology suggests something different. For many people, this isn't simply a personality trait. It's a habit the nervous system learned very early in life. When a child grows up in an emotionally unpredictable environment, where criticism, tension, or emotional outbursts can happen without warning, their brain starts looking for one simple goal. Don't attract attention, because being noticed sometimes meant conflict. Being too loud, too emotional, or simply taking up too much space could feel unsafe. So without realizing it, the nervous system begins associating quietness with safety. Over time, that behavior becomes automatic. Years later, the original environment may be gone, but the body continues following the same rules. Trauma specialist Dr. Bessel van der Kolk has written extensively about how the nervous system often remembers survival patterns long after the conscious mind has forgotten the experiences that created them. In other words, your body may still be protecting you from a danger that no longer exists. And once you begin noticing this pattern, another habit often starts making sense too. Some people don't just become quieter, they become experts at noticing everyone else's emotions before anyone says a single word. 2. You read the room before anyone speaks. Before anyone says a single word, you already feel that something is different. Someone's voice sounds slightly colder. A smile doesn't seem quite genuine. The room suddenly feels heavier, even though nothing obvious has happened. And somehow, you notice it before everyone else. Most people would call this intuition. Some would call it emotional intelligence. And in many ways, it is. But psychology suggests that for some people, this ability didn't begin as a gift. It began as protection. Children who grow up in emotionally unpredictable homes often learn that noticing emotional changes isn't just helpful. It's necessary. They become highly sensitive to small shifts in tone, facial expressions, body language, and emotional atmosphere, because recognizing those changes early gives them time to prepare, to avoid conflict, to avoid criticism, or simply to stay emotionally safe. Over time, this constant scanning becomes automatic. The brain stops asking, is something wrong? Instead, it immediately starts asking, what changed? Research in developmental psychology suggests that children raised in emotionally inconsistent environments often develop heightened sensitivity to social and emotional cues as an adaptive response. What once helped them navigate childhood can quietly become part of everyday adult life. The difficult part is that after years of paying so much attention to everyone else's emotions, many people slowly lose the habit of paying attention to their own. And that's where another surprisingly common pattern begins. Not knowing what you actually want. 3. When you don't know what you want. Someone asks you a simple question. What do you want to eat? Where would you like to go? What do you feel like doing today? And instead of answering, your mind goes completely blank. Not because you're trying to be polite. Not because you don't care. You genuinely don't know. So you say, anything is fine. Whatever you want. I don't mind. Most people assume they're simply easygoing. But psychology suggests something deeper may be happening. When a child's emotions, preferences, or needs are repeatedly ignored, the brain slowly learns that those signals aren't very important. Over time, other people's feelings begin to matter more than your own. Not because you choose that, but because your nervous system learned that paying attention to others was more useful than paying attention to yourself. Psychologist Dr. John Ice Webb, who introduced the concept of childhood emotional neglect to millions of people, explains that children whose emotions are consistently overlooked often grow up disconnected from their own feelings, preferences, and emotional needs. As adults, they become remarkably good at adapting. They know what everyone else wants. They know how to avoid disappointing people. They know how to keep the peace. But when someone asks, "What do you want?" the answer doesn't come easily, because for years, that question was rarely asked, and even more rarely answered. Over time, this habit can become so automatic that many people begin believing they simply don't need much. But sometimes, they learned to expect very little, and that often leads to another pattern that's mistaken for strength: extreme independence. First, when asking for help feels wrong, someone notices you're struggling. Do you need any help? And almost without thinking, you answer, "No, I'm fine." Even when you're exhausted. Even when everything feels overwhelming. Even when having help would make your life much easier. Somehow, doing it alone feels more comfortable than depending on someone else. Most people see this as independence. But psychology suggests it isn't always confidence. Sometimes, it's self-protection. Children who grow up in emotionally neglectful environments often learn very early that their emotional needs won't always be noticed or met. So instead of expecting support, they learn to expect themselves. Little by little, asking for help begins to feel uncomfortable. Not because they're incapable, but because needing someone else starts to feel unfamiliar. Over time, handling everything alone stops being a choice. It becomes part of who they believe they are. Research on childhood emotional neglect suggests that when emotional support is consistently unavailable, many children develop excessive self-reliance as an adaptive strategy. What once helped them cope can quietly become the only way they know how to live. And the strange part is, many people with this pattern don't just avoid asking for help. They also feel uncomfortable receiving it, because being cared for can feel more unfamiliar than carrying everything alone. And once your nervous system becomes used to surviving this way, even something as simple as resting can begin to feel uncomfortable. 5. Why rest makes you feel guilty. You finally finish everything. You sit down. The house is quiet. Nothing needs your attention anymore. But instead of feeling relaxed, you suddenly feel restless, almost guilty. So you grab your phone. Find another task. Start cleaning something. Anything, except simply resting. Most people think they're just bad at relaxing. But psychology suggests something else. For many children who grew up in emotionally neglectful environments, peace never truly felt safe. Sometimes criticism appeared without warning. Sometimes being productive brought approval, while resting brought guilt. Over time, the nervous system stopped associating stillness with safety. It learned to stay alert, even when there was nothing left to fear. Research suggests that early emotional environments can shape how the nervous system responds to calm throughout adulthood. For some people, rest doesn't feel uncomfortable because they're lazy. It feels uncomfortable because their body never fully learned that it's safe to let go. And after years of living this way, another habit quietly begins to appear. The way you speak to yourself. 6. The voice that's hardest on you. Imagine your best friend made the same mistake you made today. Would you judge them the way you judge yourself? Probably not. You'd tell them it wasn't a big deal. That everyone makes mistakes. That they should move on. So why is it so much harder to show yourself the same kindness? For many people, The harshest voice they hear isn't someone else's anymore. It's their own. Psychologists believe that children who grow up without consistent emotional validation often learn to direct criticism inward. Instead of questioning the environment, they begin questioning themselves. Little by little, that voice becomes automatic, not loud, just constant. Over time, it no longer feels like criticism. It simply feels like the truth. But here's what many people never realize. That voice wasn't something you were born with. It was something you learned. And just because your mind learned it, doesn't mean it has to stay that way forever. If you recognized yourself in several of these habits, it doesn't necessarily mean you experienced childhood emotional neglect. Human behavior is complex, and no single video can explain someone's entire life. But if these patterns felt deeply familiar, they may be worth paying attention to, because many of the behaviors we call personality aren't simply personality. Sometimes, they're survival strategies, quiet adaptations your nervous system created to help you feel safe in an environment where your emotional needs weren't always seen. The remarkable thing is, those adaptations probably worked. They helped you get through childhood. The challenge is that survival patterns often remain, long after survival is no longer necessary. And that's why awareness matters. Not to blame your parents, not to see yourself as broken, but to finally understand yourself with a little more compassion. Because healing doesn't always begin by changing who you are. Sometimes, it begins the moment you realize you were never the problem. You were adapting. And now, for the first time, you have the chance to choose something different. If this video helped you understand yourself a little better, let me know in the comments which habit resonated with you the most. And if you'd like to explore more of the hidden psychology behind everyday behaviors, I'd love to see you in the next video.